Welcome to our post-cabinet media conference for today. And today, the media conference will be addressed by Dr. Keith Rowley, Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Rowley.
Thank you very much, members of the media, members of the national community. I thought, given the fact that tomorrow is a holiday, and then Friday gets squeezed in between the weekend and another holiday on Monday, that given all that has happened in the last week or so, that I would come before you and clarify a few things for you and give you the opportunity to place a few questions to me if you do have one or so. Let me begin by backing up a little bit to the developments of the last week, by saying that the last week has been quite interesting from the standpoint that some very, I don't want to say anticipated positives took place, but we did have some element of anticipation given that we were working since last September on becoming Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago on the 9th of September. Soon after that, I had some long conversations with the President of Venezuela. And during those conversations, we undertook to focus on deepening the relationship between Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago on the basis that we are very close neighbors, and while we may not speak the same language, that ought not to be a barrier, but we do have some interests, which if we work together on those interests, they can bring some significant benefit to both countries. So those discussions started last September, and it was followed by a number of working sessions between the technical teams of Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago at the ministerial level and at the sub-ministerial level. And a very interesting development arose out of that. And that is that we have just signed a memorandum of understanding where Venezuela has agreed, and Trinidad and Tobago also agreed, to work together with respect to the urgent monetization of gas fields, which are not only on the border between Trinidad and Tobago, but in the case of the Dragon field, which are fields within Venezuela. Eastern Venezuela has a large province of hydrocarbons, and there are proven gas fields north of the Bocas area, which we call the Dragon fields. It's assumed that those fields have as much gas, and probably more, than the proven fields in Trinidad and Tobago at this time. And hitherto our discussions of recent months and the memorandum of this week, those fields were not in the discussion with respect to being produced for use in Trinidad and Tobago and onward to the international market. So the main thing that came out of that meeting this week and the work we've done in the last few weeks is that we have taken a decision that we'll create an entity that will set about to produce the gas from the proven fields, and there's an agreement that that gas will go to market by way of Trinidad and Tobago. Those fields are 17 kilometers away from existing pipeline in Trinidad. And if there is to be a new pipeline, Trinidad and Tobago is prepared by way of our national gas company, along with Venezuela, to ensure that that pipeline is built. What that would do is to ensure the longevity of the Point Lisa estate and downstream industries of a similar nature. We have only just signed an agreement with Mitsubishi, for the building of a new methanol plant in Trinidad to put more methanol into the marketplace. But that agreement and the willingness by Mitsubishi and Neil and Massey and NGC to invest in that plant had a bit of a cloud over it, in that the question was, where will the gas come from? In the next few weeks, we should be spudding new wells in our deep water horizon. BHP Billiton is about to begin that drilling program in the deep water. And while we are very excited about the prospects of that deep water horizon, until the gas is found, the drilling program carries with it only an expectation. But we are very upbeat in what we are going to be expecting from the BHP drilling program. So the expectation was that within Trinidad and Tobago, we hope to expand our proven gas fields by way of the drilling program that's underway now, or about to start in the next few weeks or so. But the Dragon fields are proven gas fields. And the fact that we have agreed to make that gas available to the infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago, once we operationalize this decision and put it into practice, put it into action, then the downstream in Trinidad and Tobago would have moved from a period of uncertainty and gas curtailment to a period of satisfaction, where there will be enough gas for a long time to satisfy the needs of the industries which are built in Trinidad and Tobago. What that does for us is to sustain what we have and even grow it into a larger industrial complex. What it does for Venezuela is that it brings gas that is not now going to market to the marketplace to be sold either as LNG or as raw material for downstream processing. So both Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela would benefit significantly from this development. And this is new. Before that, we were working and spending all these years, I think about 15 years, trying to come to an arrangement to produce the gas from the Loran, Manatee, Dorado, Manikin, Coquina fields, which are small fields on the southern border. But those fields are largely tied in with oil companies that have a significant say in what happens or what doesn't happen. And those discussions seem to be going on forever and ever, to the point where it is the point of view in some quarters that there may be some component that has no interest in producing that gas. And insofar as we were relying on that, we were kind of beginning to feel that maybe it's not going to happen. The Dragon field has more direct control because it falls to the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the government of Venezuela to deal with it, because the resources are in the hands of the government and there is no real major third party in the middle to obstruct that development. And that is why that decision between the government of Venezuela and the government of Trinidad and Tobago was so significant and would have already caught the attention of interested parties. And it is not just the NGC and PDVSA who would be interested in this. There are other people in the hydrocarbon sector in Venezuela for whom an outlet to Trinidad and Tobago brings a certain amount of excitement. And one of these interested areas was part of the discussions I had in London recently, and it has now created an opening of great promise for us here. So notwithstanding all that you've carried in the coverage of that meeting, the main thing of that meeting is the potential for us to access those larger Dragon fields of gas. And if that happens, then we in Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela would be on to a new phase, not only of cooperation, but of economic prosperity. The other thing I want to mention is the national security issues. We have been in recent times seeing a lot of firearms on the street in Trinidad and Tobago, automatic weapons. And as head of the National Security Council, and speaking for the council, it is our view that much of those items are coming to us from South America. And therefore we have, in the face of a crime wave which is not abating in Trinidad, we have concerns about this unending supply of offensive weapons which are coming to us, and the ease with which our porous southern border can be penetrated by persons who are engaged in illicit activities. We've discussed this at length with the president of Venezuela, who was very understanding of it, and Venezuela also has a similar kind of problem. And insofar as there's some element of economic, social, and political instability in Venezuela, the environment in which this kind of lawlessness on our southern border could be accelerated is a matter of great concern to the National Security Council. So important is it to us that we agree to give this top priority, where Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago have agreed to take immediate steps to tighten our borders in the southern area between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. To that end, the first meeting of the Joint Security Coordinating Committee is to take place on Saturday, or is it Monday? But the cabinet today agreed. So our Minister of National Security is leading a team to Venezuela in the coming weekend so that this work can begin. And Venezuela has agreed to have the security agency cooperation heightened so that we could confront the possible activities of persons who engage in criminal conduct, whether it is drugs, arms, or persons, because they all impact on the level of crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela. So we are hoping that these developments will put us in a better position to confront our security issues insofar as our contact with Venezuela and Colombia via Venezuela is concerned. The other issue I want to raise is the issue of the SSA, which in my absence while I was abroad, a lot of statements were made and actions taken with respect to an action of the government. I want to reiterate that one of the problems we're having in Trinidad and Tobago is the ineffectiveness of the security services in responding to the criminal element. And that ineffectiveness is largely the result of an absence of pertinent information. If you don't have the information, then your detection level would be low. Those who commit offenses would do them with impunity. And if you're going to change that, it doesn't matter who the Minister of National Security is or which government is in office. If the security agencies are starved for pertinent and relevant information, the security services would be leaping in the dark. So throughout the world, especially in areas where there are particular threats of one kind or another, there's a requirement for the security agencies to inform themselves about criminal conduct and the intention of criminals. We set about to do that when we created the SSA, which is the agency in our country through which our treaty obligations are being discharged. We are required to put ourselves in a position to obtain information. The SSA was created to treat with the drugs and psychotropic substances and precursor substances and so on, because that was seen to be an area that we had to focus on. And the SSA came into being specifically to deal with that. And when it was created by statute, it eventually was settled that it would be dealing with serious crimes. And the serious crimes were listed to a very limited number of areas. All that we have done with respect to the amendment that we have brought to the Parliament is to broaden the number of items of criminality that fall under the heading of serious crime, so as to allow the definition of serious crime to cover the things that are now of concern to us given the crime wave and the nature of the criminality we're confronting. I can't for the life of me understand, and I have not heard a single person, especially from the opposition, saying why they justifiably have an objection to this crime or that crime or the other crime, which is now being brought under the definition of serious crime, why we should not treat those elements of crime as serious. And the reason is they know it's serious. And the definition covers what we accept as serious crimes. But what they have done, they have confused the issue with spying and saying that, oh, privacy will be interfered with, and this is going to happen, and that is going to happen. Well, they are two separate things. The SSA is a separate piece of legislation. The interception of telecommunication is another piece of legislation. And all the concerns which people have raised about what is going to happen and whose privacy is going to be interfered with and so on and so on and so on, those issues have already been dealt with under the Interception of Telecommunications Act. And interestingly enough, I was the leader of the opposition when for the first time we were legislating how the state agencies treat with penetrations of privacy by way of intercepting telecommunication. Before October of 2010, there was no law covering that activity. And if that activity was taking place, it was not taking place in the breach of any statute. But we said there had to be statute to control any misconduct or excesses on the part of the state agencies. And that was the subject of debate in the parliament. And I led the opposition in full support of the government of the day. And that bill, the Interception of Telecommunications, which allows interception of telecommunication matters, was passed unanimously in the parliament. And in that law, concerns for privacy and concerns to control abuse and so on were taken care of by specifying in law that only 3 persons can authorize the interception of telecommunication. Before that, anybody could have done it. But when that law was passed in 2010, authorizing the interception of telecommunication, the police commissioner, the head of the defense force, and the head of the SSA are the only 3 officers who could intercept telecommunication. Any other interception was deemed by law now to be illegal. That happened in 2010 with opposition support. And of course, there were 2 kinds of interceptions. If interceptions were done without a warrant, the law requires that what information they gather had to be destroyed in a particular time frame. Destroyed, not kept for anybody's record to hurt anybody. If, on the other hand, they had time and reason to get a warrant, which they had to get from a judge, then that evidence could be kept and held and used as evidence. All of this took place in 2010 with the support of the PNM opposition. Now we have a crime wave in the country, and the PNM is in government. And we say that we will broaden the number of serious crimes which these same 3 offices, police commissioner, head of the defense force, head of the SSA, these same 3 offices can now use the SSA reach to coordinate and to continue to be the treaty executing agency of Trinidad and Tobago. Persons who are either ill-informed or persons who are obstructing or being obstructive or just downright mischievous, or worse, who would like us to remain without the necessary information to respond effectively to the criminal element, are now telling the country that there's an SSA Act that is somehow to be obstructed and somehow not to be allowed to come into force because the government is doing something wrong. But I want to say something here today. There was an election in Trinidad and Tobago in September 7th. A government was elected, and that government has a mandate to bring about certain changes for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We go to the Parliament to make that amendment, which is to give the security agencies a better vantage point to respond to the criminal element. And we have independent senators who are free to be independent, but organizing themselves as a political party in the Parliament to obstruct the government's progress. Well, the law is very clear. If the government gets one vote from the independent, the law is well and duly passed. 2 members of the independents voted with the government, and we're very happy for their support, because it allows the government to pass into law a very valid piece of legislation, an amendment which doesn't create any new power for anybody to spy, but simply to identify new actions of criminality to be designated as serious crime, to fall under the definition of serious crime. That's all it does. And to allow the agency to train, and to allow the agency to accept resources for its execution of its duties. I don't know that the average person in Trinidad and Tobago has a problem with that. And therefore, that bill was passed into the Parliament and is awaiting the assent of the President. In the meantime, we believe that that action would have contributed, once it is passed into law, it would contribute to the security services being less blind with respect to what is going on in and around us. The bill has been passed now for almost over 2 weeks. We are expecting the bill to be assented, and upon assent, the proclamation will come, and the security services would be in a better position to respond to the criminal element. And we expect that this will happen. The matter of what happens with opposition members, with independent members, is not a matter that will distract this government. We will take bills to Parliament, we will make our case, and we will expect that the citizenry will either stand with us or will see us doing what they do not support. It is the duty of the government to ensure that the security of the state is maintained and that there is a sense of safety in the national community. Everybody looks to the government to discharge those responsibilities. But it cannot be that you look to the government to discharge those responsibilities, but the operational side of it is in the hands of others who want to appear as though they have no interest in ensuring that the country effectively carry out these responsibilities. The government virtually has no control over the Commissioner of Police. As you know, the Commissioner of Police is an independent office. It is the police service that is our front line in dealing with the criminal element. I will say no more for the moment, but the government will remain responsible for the security of the state. And the government will rely on the resources and the personnel who are made available to respond. And insofar as the government has gone to Parliament and has passed legislation with the requisite majority, we expect that such a majority will be respected at every level and that the government will not be impeded in its very urgent exercise in setting about to provide the citizenry with every possibility of being successful in bringing about safety and security in Trinidad and Tobago. If you have any questions, I will take them now.
Joel Brown from TV6 News. Prime Minister, just wondering, did you have any concern about increasing Trinidad and Tobago increasing ties, commodity ties, energy ties with Venezuela at a time when its economy seems to be on the verge of a collapse, was in a serious state, and there are concerns about the political stability in Venezuela at this time?
I'm glad you raised that question because it allows me to put it on the record that Trinidad and Tobago has absolutely no interest in getting involved in the internal political affairs of Venezuela. And what goes on in the politics of Venezuela is a matter for the people of Venezuela to determine who governs their country. But Venezuela is our nearest neighbor and provides us with the requirement to treat with that reality. Whatever goes on in Venezuela, good, bad, or indifferent, will have an impact on Trinidad and Tobago one way or the other, whether we like it or not. And therefore, we need to pay attention to what's going on there. But insofar as getting involved in it, it is not for us to get involved in there. Secondly, whatever happens in Venezuela, good, bad, or indifferent, creates opportunities for us in Trinidad and Tobago. One opportunity is that if Venezuela finds itself in a position not being able to buy food elsewhere or to produce its own food, and we are in a position to supply Venezuela with manufactured goods, foodstuff or otherwise, it falls to us as a trading nation to supply. If we have goods to sell and there's a market in Venezuela, whether the politics is smooth or whether it is topsy-turvy, we are a trading nation. What has happened before is that there was no arrangement to affect the trade. As a matter of fact, we must be the only country in the world that has a neighbor 7 miles away. Are we not having any serious cross-border trade going on? The absence of a cross-border trade between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela is one of the shortcomings of our region. However, the discussions that took place between September and now have, to a large extent, dealt with that. Because the concerns are, Venezuela is in financial turmoil, as we are. How are they going to pay for whatever we supply? Well, you would have heard the president of Venezuela himself addressing that issue, saying that Venezuela has provided in Venezuela, in the relevant agency, under the relevant minister, a rolling $50 million US, which means that you spend it, you can replenish it, to buy a list of goods from Trinidad and Tobago. Again, I can't understand for the life of me why anybody in Trinidad and Tobago will have a problem with monies being made available in Venezuela so that they can buy from us here in Trinidad and Tobago. The circumstances in Venezuela might have driven that situation to come at this time, and we just treat it at this time. It's an opportunity for our manufacturers to maintain employment in their factories, to expand their production, and more, to get a little less cautious and to penetrate the Venezuelan market in a way that we haven't done before. And if we do that, we may create the kinds of trading links that ought to have existed a long time ago, because our factories can produce more. And if they produce more, then they earn more, then they hire more people. We rely very heavily on CARICOM, but we are pretty much saturated in the CARICOM market. We're talking about partial scope agreements right now with Chile, and we're looking at Costa Rica and so on. All that would have happened here is that in the current climate, in the current discussions, it appears as though we have come to a situation where we can get into the Venezuelan market in a way that we had not got into before, with the support of the Venezuelan government. And of course, in Trinidad and Tobago, we are going to support our manufacturers to make sure that whatever arrangement is put in place, that they can benefit, and we're asking them to go brave.
So the government is able to give a guarantee that even if Venezuela's economic situation worsens, and it's projected that it could, that once they do send those products across to Venezuela, they will be paid for them.
The products will go to Venezuela against the background that we have been given the assurance by the Venezuelan government that they will make the funding available. And that's where the figure of 50 million has come in. The Venezuelan government is putting aside the funding to make the arrangements workable. And if that approach doesn't work, maybe another approach will work. But for the moment, that is the approach you're pursuing.
And just in terms of the issue of the gas supply, in terms of the Dragon field, the proven reserves, have those fields actually, have they begun production of those fields?
No, there's
or?
no production of those fields. In fact, there's no infrastructure. And the infrastructure to those fields, the closest infrastructure is Trinidad and Tobago's infrastructure. And that is why this decision to bring those fields into the discussion is so far-reaching, because it will require infrastructure to a known gas supply.
Yeah, you have a sense, because we're trying to get at the diplomatic center, after we spoke to a couple of the ministers, how much cubic feet of natural gas are in those fields?
The figure we're familiar with is anywhere in the order of 12 or 13 trillion cubic feet, which is slightly above what we have as our proven reserves. And that is not the full extent of the provenance. So there are other areas that can be explored.
But would it be that we have the capacity to do this level of extraction? Would we have to depend on other companies or other countries for assistance?
We have what it takes to bring that gas to market in Trinidad and Tobago. You may recall that when we brought our East Coast gas to Point 14, the pipeline that was laid at the time was one of the largest pipelines in the world, paid for and operated by the National Gas Company. I think it was a 54 or 56-inch pipeline that exists from our East Coast into Point 14. So we've done these things. I mean, that's not a problem for the NGC. We got a pipeline from Hibiscus coming down from NCMA on the North Coast to Point 14. BG used to operate that pipeline. It's now Shell, and that pipeline is only 17 kilometers from the Dragon field.
Just shifting gears, one other question, Prime Minister. Given the voice notes that have been circulating that have caused some concern about whether or not there are threats by ISIS against malls here and so on, I'm just wondering, has the government received any or sought any sort of assistance from any other foreign government, foreign country, for assistance in dealing with any potential ISIS threat in Trinidad and Tobago?
We have not, with respect to the particular thing on this weekend. In general? Oh, generally, yes. One of the reasons for my visit to the United Kingdom and the United States last week was to ensure that we maintain that line of communication and the understanding of the assistance that we require and the cooperation that we engage in between our major partners in national security. And that assistance is very forthcoming from the major countries that we interact with, the United States and the United Kingdom. And we are very well served by their involvement with us with respect to our training of our security personnel, creation of institutional arrangements to ensure that we get the benefit of what they do and that we improve our security based on what they can help us with. I must say, though, without saying too much, that there are concerns with respect to some areas of our ability to handle and share information with these metropolitan countries. And that's an area of serious concern to us at the level of the National Security Council. And we work very assiduously towards that. I say no more for the moment.
I want to just tack on to this question first. Have we attempted to identify the origin, the source of the voice notes? And do we have the capacity, our security forces?
We have some capacity, but I don't know that capacity has been able to deliver to us a source. What we do know is that it has not been determined that it is something that has an origin that we can identify as being realistic. And we also know that there are elements, persons, and entities whose interests will be served if Trinidad and Tobago is destabilized in this kind of way. And we treat all threats seriously, and we take very careful note of those who will destabilize us.
When you say destabilize, you mean the putting out of the voice notes is an attempt to destabilize, or is it that the threat is real enough to destabilize?
We don't have information in our hands now to say that that particular threat is real. What we do know is that that kind of information, real or otherwise, has the potential to be a destabilizing influence.
Okay. The government, you have just spoke spoken at length about the SSA bill, and clearly the government feels that this is an urgent matter. What then is that you said, well, it was 2 weeks ago that it was passed in the Parliament. What then is the cause of the delay in bringing the bill into full implementation?
Well, once a bill like that is passed in the Parliament and the vote is taken, the office of the President would be advised of the outcome in the Parliament. Then it falls to the President to assent. And then it falls to the Cabinet to determine the date of the proclamation, which means the date on which that law comes into force. Without the presidential assent, the Cabinet cannot proclaim, and the work of the Parliament remains in limbo until the assent is had. I have seen requests by those who feel defeated that the President should not assent to the bill. I trust that such advice is not taken seriously.
Are you concerned that there may be that the delay? Are you concerned by the delay, and is it impinging on the government's ability to address the crime situation, which in the last 2 weeks we've seen the escalation with law enforcement, people being killed and so on? How is the ability to address the crisis that you have said we face in crime being hindered by the lack of the assent being granted?
As I said before, part of the failure of our national security apparatus is an absence of appropriate information. That amendment to the SSA Act, which was carried out in the Parliament, is an action that is meant to improve access to information, because we cannot start a moment too soon to begin to find out what the criminal element is doing and is thinking. In today's world, the communication system is such and so all-pervasive that criminals in all kinds of activity are engaging in communication. And if we are in on that communication, then we have a better position to respond from. That's what it is. So the longer we wait to put ourselves in a position to find out where information exists and who is doing and saying what, even planning and saying what, and also who has done what, because communication is the glue that holds a lot of criminality together. And it is for the security services to get in on that communication. And that is why there's an Interception of Telecommunications Act allowing that penetration of persons who become of interest to the security services, and why there's an SSA Act to allow SSA personnel to work together in making this a reality, to make the security services more effective in responding to the criminal element. And we can't do that a day too soon.
Okay, my last question before I hand over. There were statements made, you mentioned the independent senators, and yesterday the government brought a motion of privilege against temporary Senator Gerald Ramdeen. There were comments from 2 independent senators, which I'd like to get your comment on. Danasa Mohabia said that motion of privilege should have come from the independent bench because it affected a member of the independent bench. And 2, independent Senator Shriki Soon questioned the basis on which the Attorney General issued the invitation to former temporary Senator Justice John Clair to attend the meeting of the security experts on the SSA bill, because he said at the time the invitation was issued, Senator Small was in the country, and therefore Justice John Clair was not a senator at the time. Could I get your comment on those?
I really don't want to get involved in this new development on the independent bench, except to say that the standing orders of the Senate would indicate to anyone who cares to look that any member of the Senate could raise a motion of privilege if that member perceives that the privilege of the House has been interfered with. And it is not for Senator Mahabir to tell the government senators what they should and shouldn't do. If a government senator sees that the privilege of the House has been interfered with or has been threatened, and there's a matter of privilege to be raised in the interest of preserving the privilege of the House, then I don't know where this independent senator would have got it from to say that that should have been done by any particular person or group of persons in the House. The House identify members. And as a matter of fact, if the member is so inclined to raise that as an issue, I would have expected that he would have been in the forefront of filing the motion and therefore not making it relevant for the government to do such. And with respect to how the Attorney General happened to invite, I seem to recall that John Clair was made an independent senator. So at the last sitting of the House, which is public business, he would have been in the House. And if you had to issue an invitation to senators, well, you say it to them. And if in the interim senators come and go, it is not for the Attorney General to keep any tab on who is there. And if Mr. John Clair was not reappointed, then so be it. And if Mr. Small had come into the House, then he would have been the person. That is not for the Attorney General to get involved in. And if he invited who was there at the last sitting, I don't see what the story is. But it appears as though there are people fishing for all kinds of issues to raise on this matter. And all that it brings to me is, why are they so hell-bent on obstructing our fight against the criminal element? And let me just say one thing, for the benefit of the public, who they intend to mislead. If my memory serves me right, I was in the Senate in 1987, I think it was, when the NAR brought to the Parliament, to the Senate, where I was a member, a bill which had the effect, or which was going to have the effect, of cutting public servants' pay and removing cost of living allowance. That bill came to the House. And a body of senators, the opposition, including myself, and the independents, very strongly opposed that bill. And my colleagues in the Parliament and on the independent bench were people like Gerard Furness-Smith, Louise Horn, Alan Alexander, Senator Spence, and Krishna Bahadur Singh. Those were the independent senators then. And they opposed that bill. And the House was adjourned. And the following day we came, and one independent senator voted with the government. And the bill was passed into law, and public servants' pay was cut. I don't recall then that the opposition at the time launched any attack on the government or the independent senators because they voted in a particular way. We respected the vote of the independent member. But lo and behold today, the opposition, in attempting to obstruct the government and having failed, is now misleading the public about how many votes and who voted, and is questioning the member to the point of infringing the privilege of the member of the House. And that is what the population should look at. And what is worse, that vote that was cast with the government on that day was challenged in the court. And the court ruled that the government had acted illegally. And public servants had to get back their cost of living allowance. Remember that? And you know who was in the NER then doing that? The same people who today making an issue of the John Clair vote, as though he did something wrong. It is not for me to defend Senator John Clair, but I'm defending the privilege and the right of any member of the House to vote as he or she sees fit. That is what is being challenged there. Questioning the root of our Constitution because their nefarious actions didn't succeed. I ask you today, if the bill had failed by one vote, how many of them would have been shedding tears for the government because we lost it by only one vote? They'd have been jumping up and down. The government is defeated. This government will not be distracted by the obstructionists. We have a job to do for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and we'll do it to the best of our ability in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Prime Minister, going back to the report of this alleged ISIS threat, I know the voice notes spoke to something about threats against malls and things like that, but has there been any increase in the security around key office holders as a result of this?
I am not prepared to discuss the security arrangements of personnel or stations. That is not a matter for this kind of conversation, except to say that we disregard no threat and we put our country in a position to be able to respond to the best of our ability.
Okay. On another issue, could you possibly give us your opinion on the continued assertions by the opposition, particularly Dr. Botuwari and Dr. Rudal Munilal, that bid rigging was a crime under the former government with regard to the procurement legislation?
Again, I don't know that we should spend too much time with these unproductive conversations. There's something called common law, where certain things are deemed to be right and wrong. We have a law. The label and the name of it is the procurement of and the disposal of. And the last government was very careful not to include in that law the disposal of land, spelled out in that law, for good reason. And Dr. Botuwari was the Minister of Government who brought that to the Parliament. And when we sought to insist that the disposal of land should be recognized specifically in that law, he said to us to our face, I am taking no amendment. And we said, well, we'll go and win the election. And when we win the election, we'll be the government. And we'll amend the law to specify that disposal of land must fall under the law as spelled out in the statute. That's what we have done. That's what we have done. And I need not tell you how many billions of dollars in state land that found its way into the hands of people under the last government. And now you understand why it was not put in the law as a specific offense. Bid rigging. You have 4 or 5 companies bidding, pretending to be competing against each other. And when you look behind the company name and the directors, you see they're the same people. The same people own the same companies, and they're competing against each other. That is called bid rigging. We specify that in law. Because if it's not specified in law, and you seek to go after persons who have done that, then you give the lawyers the opportunity to argue all around it, and then the lawyers prevail. Now that it is spelled out as a specific statute item that can be pointed to in a court of law, and a person could be charged specifically under the Act, it is now an offense where you can be identified for having breached a particular statute.
Mr. Prime Minister, good afternoon. In the context of the gas exploration that you spoke to, could you give a timeline that perhaps before the end of this year, some kind of sign would be given that we are on the way to the exploration?
The only thing that I can say to that is that the operations are being treated as a matter of some urgency, and it now falls to the technical people to work out the speed at which we can move from where we are to the production of that gas. There are certain gestational things that have to take place, starting with the operations. Who will operate these fields? And of course, if you have to put in a new pipeline and so on and so on. So all these things will take time. But we are much nearer there than before the decision was made.
A worst case scenario could be, let's say, a change of government in Venezuela. Would our memoranda of understanding signed be affected if that were the case, and what contingencies could be looked at?
Well, let's put it this way. As I said before, we are not getting involved in who governs Venezuela. We recognize the people of Venezuela. And we expect that the people of Venezuela, whoever is in office, will see where Venezuela's interest lies. And insofar as cooperating with Trinidad and Tobago, we would expect that a government of Venezuela would see that its interests and ours coalesce on this matter.
In your post meeting with the Venezuelan president, you did speak to the repatriation of citizens detained both sides of the fence. That's Venezuela and Trinidad and Tobago. In some quarters, this could be seen as a preferential treatment, in that we have other citizens detained, for example, in our detention center in Trinidad, who may also be up for consideration for repatriation. Where does this fit?
All the persons who are detained in Trinidad and Tobago for having violated our Immigration Act, all those persons are under consideration. As a matter of fact, we have, I'm told, we have 8 Ghanaians who are in the detention center. And last week, 2 weeks ago, when I met with the Ghanaian authorities, that matter came up. And we undertook to try and see how we can resolve that matter by getting them out of there and getting back home. The problem we're having with Ghanaians and similar persons from great distances, once you have to pass through a third country, it becomes a very, very difficult operation. There's no direct flight between Trinidad and Tobago and Ghana, so we can't put them on a plane. We can't put them on a plane that is going to Ghana by way of New York or London, because to get them through those ports, you end up with a no-go. And that is the problem we're having. So only this morning, we looked at this particular situation with the Ghanaians and the Nigerians who are here in detention, as to how much it would cost to continue feeding them here and looking after them and securing them. And the figure we are told is about $25,000 per person. Now, if you multiply that by the number of persons, and then you look at the cost of a charter aircraft to end the problem, that is where the discussion has to be. Because you have to charter of an aircraft to fly them from here to their home country, because you can't pass through another country with them. In the case of Venezuela, that is not a problem. We can go directly from here to Venezuela. So therefore, it's an easier problem to solve.
Prime Minister, quite apart from what is being done in terms of cross-border tightening controls to avoid, guns and ammunition and drugs coming into our countries, on land, has there been government consideration, or you may be able to answer summarily? 1, a gun amnesty. 2, a gun court. 3, let's say a stepped up police surveillance or police, activity or limited state of emergency in some constituencies in the context of the seriousness of crime and the escalation of gun use?
There's a number of options you've raised there. Let's take the state of emergency first. The answer is no. We are not considering a state of emergency. That has been tried and failed spectacularly. It brought about a very short respite, but it damaged the economy almost irreparably. And it did not, in the end, prove to be a sustainable response. The other point you raised is whether the security services are, in fact, stepping up their game in terms of confronting the criminal element. And the answer is yes. You would have seen, or you would have heard the Minister of National Security saying how much more aggressive the national security elements are, the police and the defense force, and I just mentioned the whole question of information gathering. All of those things together, we expect to be putting pressure on the criminal element. And of course, as we get information, our detection level should improve. We are, in the government, very disappointed that even as we have gone past the parliament, the cabinet activity, to set about to put a commissioner of police in place, that seems to be going at a snail pace. We want to reiterate, it is the job of the police service to confront the criminal element. That is their job. It is the responsibility of the government. But the people, the actual people who are out there doing it as their job, is the police service. And we believe that proper, confident leadership at the top, leadership that takes responsibility for that assignment, that leadership being properly appointed, bringing onto the police service the level of heightened morale, would be a positive for Trinidad and Tobago. We do not accept that the current arrangement of an acting commissioner of police ad infinitum is the best way to manage our police service. And therefore, we would expect that all persons involved in accelerating us to the point where there's a proper commissioner of police in office, and the men and women under the commissioner are properly directed by starting with proper appointments and an improvement in the morale of the service, which we expect will be reflected in the effectiveness of the service. We believe that's one direction to go.
Okay.
And cooperation between the police service and the other arms of the state agencies, that cooperation should put us in a better position to respond to this rampant criminality. And finally, I want to say this. There was a time not too long ago when the bloodbath that we're facing now was a Laventil, East Port of Spain thing. Today, the news comes to us from every quarter, including Tobago, that there are people across the country who are prepared to engage in violent criminal conduct, resulting in homicides and a very poor detection level. And among us are a number of people who would have committed murder and go unhindered in our national community. That is a problem that cannot be allowed to continue. And it starts with a better response from those whose job it is to confront the criminal element. And that body of persons is the police service. And we want to do everything possible to ensure that the hardworking police officers are supported, the shirkers are removed, and that the management of the police service is a management worthy of the title.
Okay, and last but certainly not least, the matter of possible refugees or refugee status. Where is our government stance in this, in the context of we may have a drift of people from Venezuela, given the crisis that is the socio-economic crisis that they are facing, and we are hearing what is happening in terms of what's happening at Cedros, for example, one instance.
We are next door to a situation which could generate economic and other kinds of migrants. And it would fall to us to anticipate such eventuality. We would do nothing to encourage refugees into Trinidad and Tobago. In some cases in Europe where they have a similar problem, some countries encourage them to come to their borders. We are not on that mode, but a person is only a refugee if they end up on your soil or within your border. And once they get there, that's when the problem arises. Until they get there, it doesn't arise. And if people turn up in Trinidad and Tobago seeking refugee status, the determination has to be made by us as to whether in fact they are refugees. And if they are deemed to be refugees, facing persecution or starvation or whatever the case might be, we have an international obligation by international treaty to respond in a particular way. So you see comments about what we should and shouldn't do. We have already, as an independent nation, part of the world community, we have already said what we will do if we end up with refugees within our border, wherever they come from. A person comes in from Syria, they come from Ohio, and they declare themselves, once they end up here, and they declare themselves to be a refugee, seeking refugee status, we have already, by international treaty to which we have signed on, have determined how we'll behave towards such persons. And if the flow of persons overwhelm us or are beyond our ability to cope, then the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has to get involved. The world community has to get involved. So in this matter, we are not alone.
I was wondering, Prime Minister, so I'm reading here that the PNM's Women's League has registered a strong objection by the decision by the President to appoint a particular independent senator. I'm wondering, as leader of the party that forms the government, is that reflective of a government view on the appointment of this temporary senator? Because as I understand it, it's really the discretion of the President to appoint independent senators.
The PNM's Women's League is free to express its point of view on any matter, even a matter on the government. In this case, the PNM Women's League expressed a point of view with respect to an appointment by the President, and I have no further comment to make on that. And the government is not at this time commenting on the president's appointment, except that we acknowledge that it is the responsibility of the president to make appointments to the Senate and elsewhere, and we expect that the president will act in the interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
And just finally for me, when the president met with President Maduro and had a conversation with him, and one of the things he raised was, for example, President Carmona said he understood we have extra electricity supply due to the closure of a steel plant. Maybe he should speak to you about that matter. Was that in any way the president stepping outside of his bounds, or?
It is not for me at this time to comment on the president's bounds. The president is, you know, he has his, well, you know what powers he has. But we're not going to take any issue with that. I mean, again, the national community observes these things. We are a growing nation. We are a developing nation. And this is part of our evolution. Thank you very much, and see you. Enjoy the weekend.